You want another? Or have you learned your lesson? Oh, hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Excited for the upcoming holiday? Well, excitement breeds a lack of apprehension, something that could land you in hot water, quite literally. So, hang those stockings and say your prayers. Someone comes Christmas night that Doughboy420 likes to call Belsnickel.
We heard the whipping sound of flora against flesh. The switch fell upon our friend's back in the next room. We sat there, shivering and shaking from both freezing and fear, glancing at one another and jumping with the sound of our friend being beaten. His screaming cries turned into silent sobs. I could not help but think of the chain of events that brought us here, and the guilt of it all sunk in with the fear of the pain that was to come from the thing in the next room. We had set out to shovel driveways to earn some cash for the holiday season. We had nearly $100 from working the whole street, and that was a lot of money for us kids. Everything was going great, and we were well on our way to having enough money to buy the game system that we were working and saving for. But then this old guy decided to stiff us. We did the work. We shoveled his whole driveway, but he didn't want to pay. We went up to the door, and the old man searched around in his wallet and looked at us and apologized for not having the money that he promised us. And in hindsight, he was probably just an old man that forgot that he didn't have money for us at the time, and he probably didn't intend to take advantage of our work. But being young kids, we didn't see it that way. So, Bobby comes up with a plan to get back at this guy. After leaving his door, Bobby had noticed that there was this old hose hooked up to a faucet at the side of the man's house. So, he figured that maybe we should sneak back over there and turn his hose on. Maybe run his water bill up or something. That's what we planned on anyway. We were just kids. Jacob thought that it was a great idea and volunteered to be the one to sneak up there and turn the hose on. I wasn't sure about the whole idea, but I went along with it anyway. We snuck over to the old guy's house, and Bobby and I hid in the bushes across the road while Jacob snuck up his driveway, ducking into the shadows and behind things like he was pretending to be a ninja. Finally, he made it up to the brick-lined flower bed where the hose was coiled up at its side. Jacob reached out and twisted the faucet open to allow the water to flow freely, before turning and hightailing it back down the driveway as quickly and quietly as possible. The three of us watched and giggled, waiting for the old guy to come out and turn off the faucet. But he never came. Our plan was working perfectly. With any luck, we figured, he would owe at least what he owed us in water bills before he noticed. Again, this is what our child minds imagined at the time. We eventually went home, leaving the water running. Our plan worked out great, or so we thought, until we rode our bikes by the next day to see if he had turned the water off. Instead, we made it there in time to see the old guy on a stretcher, being loaded into an ambulance. Turns out, his driveway was wet and covered with ice the next morning, and when the guy went to turn off the hose, he slipped and fell and broke his leg. Bobby immediately turned to Jacob and I and said, "We don't tell no one, got it?" We both just nodded, still kind of in shock over the fact that it was us that had caused all this. It was our fault that the poor old man was in the hospital with a broken leg. I felt terrible, but I did promise not to tell anyone. Although I promised not to tell anyone, we never said anything about apologizing anonymously so I wanted to do everything I could to help, even though it wasn't much. I ended up leaving the guy a gift basket with some fruit and candy that I had, along with my share of the money that we had earned. It wasn't a lot, but I had to do something for him. I also left him a note explaining what happened. "Dear Sir," it began. I had no idea what his name was, so I figured I would just address him this way. "I'm sorry for what we did. Me and my friends were mad because we worked very hard and you didn't pay us for our work. So, the night before you fell on the ice, my friend snuck up your driveway and turned on your hose to get back at you. We didn't mean for you to fall and get hurt. We were just being mean. I'm so very, very sorry for what we did. I know it's not much, but I hope it helps some. I can even come and give you more of my allowance if you want. I feel really bad. I can't tell you our names because I promised that I wouldn't, but I will try my best to make you feel better. I'm so sorry." The letter ended. I left the basket of goods up there on the man's porch and rang his doorbell before running away into the bushes on the other side of the road. I watched as the man answered his door. He was sitting in a wheelchair with a cast on his leg. He slowly and awkwardly wheeled himself out of the door to get the basket. I felt even worse seeing him like this. He quickly opened the letter and read it before looking around with an odd look on his face. I thought it was kind of a half of a smile, which made me feel a tiny bit better, but it didn't help much. I ended up giving him my next 2 weeks' allowance, stuffing it in envelopes and leaving it by his door. At night, I would sit awake in bed, racked with guilt over all of it. It even got to the point where I thought I was seeing things, shadows in my room at night, glimpses of toys I didn't have, like I would see a teddy bear or something out of the corner of my eye, but when I would look, there was nothing there. It was really weird. I even began to hear things, like laughing outside, which would cause me to look out my second-floor window to find the source, but when I did, I only saw my yard, full of snow. Then, suddenly I saw something that caused me to reel back in disgust and horror. The snowman that I had made with my younger brother was now replaced with a pile of bloody meat, all molded into the shape of a snowman. The snow around it was even soaked with blood, and I could swear that the hollow-eyed, fleshy snowman was looking at me, grinning at me. I jumped away from my window and fell down onto the floor with fright. I was shaking with fear, and it took me quite some time before I was able to gather up the strength to look back outside. But when I did, I found everything returned to normal. The snow was bright, white, and reflected the calming light of the moon, and the snowman was once again just a snowman. I thought that I was going crazy from guilt and lack of sleep, and I had to do something to stop this. I had to tell someone. I couldn't keep it a secret anymore. Then, I heard a loud knocking at my bedroom door. It was so loud that I was sure that it would wake up my parents if it wasn't my parents. But if it wasn't my parents, who was it? It was far too loud to be my little brother. I was hit with a shock of realization as the loud pounding came once again. I jumped at the sound of the thumping at the door and tried to ignore it, but the knocks simply grew louder and more annoyed. I knew that I had to answer, so I climbed to my feet and walked to the door. I reached out to turn the handle, and before I could really react, the door flung open and a giant, fur-covered arm shot out of the shadows in the hall, where a massive, clawed hand with dark gray-colored skin gripped about my chest, long fingers curled around my sides and shoulders to swiftly yank me off my feet and into the darkness beyond. inside the next room, I was finally able to see my captor. It was a giant, fat beast of a man, covered in fur, ice and snow clinging to it. Only blood-covered robes covered him. His face was human-like, but his skin was a dark gray, and his fur a bit of a lighter gray. And he had a long, flowing beard that met the fur of his body without a noticeable transition between the two. The large beast dragged me across the cold, wet soil of the ground. I looked from where we had come and watched my bedroom door close, leaving me in what looked like a cave. It was dark, but there was just enough light from the glowing fungi and bioluminescent bugs crawling about. Eventually, the creature tossed me through an old wooden door and onto the hard stone ground with a painful thud. I looked up to scan my surroundings and found myself in a small room, about the size of an average bedroom. The room was completely empty aside from two small figures crouched over, shivering and shaking in the corner of the tiny area opposite the door. Upon closer examination, I found that these two terrified shadows in the corner were actually my friends Bobby and Jacob, both of them captured and thrown in here much the same way that I had been. What was that thing? I asked. Where are we? I continued. Shut up, or he'll come back. You don't want him to come back, Jacob said. Bobby remained silent, laying in the corner with his face covered. Why not? What is he? What are we doing here? I asked. I don't know. Just shut your mouth, Jacob angrily commanded me. I hushed up when I heard the loud footsteps upon muddy soil approaching the door. The monster flung open the door and rushed into the room to grab Jacob by the leg, lifting him up off the ground and dangling him several feet off of the floor. I attempted to help my friend, which, in hindsight, was an absolutely insane thing to do, but it was of no use. The large monster of a man simply batted me aside with a quick swipe, like I was a pesky fly. The beast then slammed the door shut and locked it behind him once again, which brings us back to how the story started. I was sitting in the cold room, huddled up next to Bobby for warmth and support, as I heard the sound of Jacob wailing in pain with the whip-like sound of a switch slapping upon his skin. I noticed the welts across Bobby's arms. Whatever this thing was, it was torturing us, beating us for some reason. I say us, but I had yet to receive a beating from the monster. But I feared what was to come, and it did. When the monster returned Jacob to the room, he snatched me up by the arm and dragged me kicking and screaming across the ground. I begged and pleaded, but the beast simply tossed me onto the floor and retrieved a long, fully green switch from the basket full of them, and with it, he quickly slashed towards me. I turned to shield myself, and it whipped across my back once with a loud smack, causing me to scream out in pain and fall to my knees. I braced myself for a barrage of swipes from the basket of floral whips, but a second stinging slap never came. Eventually, I looked up to find the monster looking down at me with a kind of smile across his face. This was followed by him retrieving a large, red, velvet bag from behind his back and reaching into it before holding out his massive hand above me. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't want to make him mad, so I held out my hands, where the monster dropped a few small nuts of some kind into my open palms. They appeared to be a mixture of peanuts, pecans, cashews, and pistachios. The monster then reached up into the bag and retrieved some mixed nuts for himself and popped them into his mouth. I took the hint and ate one of them. It was sweet like candy and absolutely delicious. I was originally afraid that he was going to poison me, but after eating one, I couldn't help but have another, and then another. They were amazing. The beast then snapped his giant fingers, and suddenly we were out in the cold, Snow was falling from the sky, and we were standing in the driveway of a familiar house. It was the home of the old man whom we had hurt, and it was then that I understood why all this had happened. We were being punished for hurting a poor old man. The monster simply pointed toward the door of the house to guide me to it, and I did as the beast commanded. I walked up to the man's door and rang his doorbell. I glanced back over my shoulder before the man answered, and found that the beast was gone. I explained everything to the old man, even the parts that made me sound absolutely crazy. How we were all taken by a monster and how he beat us, how it gave me candied nuts and how it left me at his door. The old man simply nodded and smiled. He told me about his childhood in Germany and how his mother used to tell him a story to make sure that he was good all year round. It was kind of like the story of Santa Claus, but instead of visiting children and giving gifts to the good ones and coal to the bad ones, he would give good children candies and would whip the bad children to teach them a valuable lesson. Belsnickel, he called it. He informed me that my friends would be all right, and they probably wouldn't remember much, if anything, of what happened to them. But they would forever remember the lesson that they were taught. And he was right. Bobby and Jacob didn't remember a thing about what happened, but they too ended up apologizing for their part in hurting the old man, and it turns out that the old man didn't need my money. His insurance covered everything, and he was actually pretty well off. He just didn't have the money on him that day when we shoveled his driveway, and he had just held onto my money whenever I dropped it off at his door. He had a small pile of cash, which he returned to me. I was reluctant to take it back because I still felt guilty, but he insisted. He informed me that he ate all the fruit and candy that I gave him, though, which he was very appreciative of that and considered that payment enough for what I had done. The three of us were able to get the game system that we were saving up for, and all was well with us for Christmas, and we had all gained a new family friend in the process. Although Jacob and Bobby forgot the monster that had taken us, I remembered, and I knew that I had to keep being a good person, or else the Belsnickel would return to teach me the lesson of the golden rule once again.
I guess all I can say is that I hope you've walked away with a lesson learned, provided you're able to walk away at all, of course. But when death is the final lesson, one is left to wonder who's left to learn its teachings. But if you're thinking about staying up to see who slides down that chimney, make sure to wait up with me again next weekend. And until then, remember to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can slay you all again next Saturday.